Chapter 1. The Tale of King Midas Before the Gold Touch. Before the gold, before the curse, before the shimmering tragedy that would one day make his name echo in the corridors of legend, there was simply a man, ere a king, yes, but still a man, living in a land that was not yet wrapped in the sheen of myth. And his name was Midas. When you hear that name, I imagine a certain image springs into your mind, a man with a greedy gaze, reaching out to touch the world and turn it into treasure. But tonight, I ask you to put that image aside. I want to take you further back, to a time when Midas was young, when gold was still just a metal to him, no more magical than the earth beneath his feet, and when his greatest concerns were not about riches, but about rain for the fields, the health of his people, and the slow, deliberate business of ruling a small but proud kingdom. We begin, as many gentle tales do, in the soft hours of morning. The sun had not yet fully risen above the hills of Phrygia, the land Midas would one day rule. The sky was a pale, tender blue, that color the day wears only when it is still deciding whether to wake. The air was cool and smelled faintly of the wild thyme that grew in patches along the slopes. The fields stretched out like a great green quilt, dotted with sheep still curled in the grass, their shepherds stirring slowly from their beds. In the small palace, and I do mean small, for in those days Phrygia was not yet a wealthy realm, a boy of about 12 sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. This boy was Midas. In that moment, he was not thinking of power or of the gods. He was wondering whether the figs in the garden were ripe yet, and whether old Theon, the gardener, might let him taste one before the rest of the household awoke. Midas was the only child of Gordias, a farmer who had, through a twist of fate and prophecy, become king. Gordias had not been born into royalty. His hands were once rough from ploughing, his back bent from years in the fields. But the gods, or perhaps mere chance, had placed him on the throne. And so, young Midas grew up in a home that was both regal and humble, where the corridors smelled faintly of hay and where his father would sometimes leave the throne to tend a stubborn olive tree in the courtyard. You must understand this. Before the storytellers painted him in gold, Midas was a child of the soil. His earliest memories were not of treasure chests or marble halls, but of crouching in the fields with the other children, pressing seeds into the earth with small, careful fingers, and learning the patience it takes to wait for them to grow. As the years turned, the rhythms of palace life shaped him, but those rhythms were not grand. His father's kingdom was modest, a scatter of villages, a patchwork of farmland, and a palace that was more a sturdy home than a citadel. Midas learned governance by walking the fields to see how the wheat was coming, by sitting with elders to hear their disputes, and by listening to merchants tell of faraway lands. The merchants. They would arrive with their camels and carts, bringing not just goods but stories. They spoke of cities where the streets shone like polished stone, of markets where spices perfumed the air, of places where peacocks strutted through gardens without fear. These tales stirred something in Midas, not greed, not yet, but a curiosity, a sense that the world was wider than his hills. Even so, he loved his home. People remembered him as a gentle boy who listened more than he spoke. There's a story, perhaps true, perhaps just fondly told, of the day Midas, 15 years old, saw a farmer struggling to carry a broken cart wheel uphill. Without hesitation, the prince lifted the wheel onto his own shoulder and carried it to the village workshop, dust and grease marking his fine tunic. When the farmer protested, saying it was not fitting for a prince to do such work, Midas had smiled and replied, "If I cannot carry a wheel, how shall I carry a kingdom?" The seasons turned slowly in Phrygia, each bringing its own labors. In spring, he walked the orchards with his father, checking blossoms. In summer, he rode out to the golden fields. Autumn brought grapes and the sharp sweet scent of new wine in the palace cellars. Winter was for stories by the fire, for the patience of waiting. One winter, when Midas was near 20, something happened, small at the time, yet it planted the first seed of the legend we know. A stranger came to the palace gates. He was no merchant, no farmer, no bard. He was an old man, hair white as frost, robe worn from travel. But his eyes, bright, watchful, seemed to see more than they should. He asked for shelter, and as custom demanded, he was welcomed. Midas greeted him personally. The old man bowed and said his name was Silenus, a traveler from far away. That night, over bread and cheese and a modest jug of wine, Silenus spoke of the wide world. He told of rivers like silver, of forests where the trees hid their crowns in the clouds, of lands where gold flowed in streams down from the mountains. Midas listened intently. There was no greed in his eyes yet, but there was wonder, the kind of wonder that changes the course of a life. In the days that followed, Midas and Silenus talked often. Silenus had a gift for turning the ordinary into something magical. Slowly, something shifted in Midas. He began to think more often of other lands, of the wealth and power they held. Not in a grasping way, not yet, but the thought was there, taking root. And so it begins, not with a wish or a curse, but with a young man listening to an old man's tales, feeling a new idea awaken in his heart. Change often comes not with thunder, but with a whisper. Weeks passed. Winter loosened its hold on the land, and the first buds appeared on the trees. Midas felt restless. He walked the palace grounds for hours, thinking of the mountains Silenus had described, where the rivers ran yellow in the sunlight. He began to ask the merchants more questions about gold, where it came from, how it was traded, what it could buy. Yet he still worked among his people. He still rose early to walk the fields. He still visited the workshops to see what the carpenters and smiths were making. And when disputes arose, over land, over sheep, over broken promises, Midas listened patiently, weighing each side before giving judgment. But at night, when the palace was quiet, his thoughts turned to the treasures of distant lands. He imagined Phrygia richer, stronger, its people secure and envied. He imagined being remembered not only as a just king, but as a great one. This dream was not yet dangerous, but it was growing. It was during the spring festival, when the first wheat shoots were blessed, that Silenus took his leave. Midas walked with him to the edge of the fields. "You have given me much to think about," a Midas said. Silenus smiled in that way old men do, when they know more than they will say. "Thoughts are seeds, my boy. Some grow into shade, others into thorns. The trick is to know which you are planting." And with that, he was gone, disappearing down the road, his figure growing smaller against the green hills. Midas stood there for a long time, the wind stirring the young wheat, the sun warm on his face. He did not know yet which kind of seed had been planted in him. But in time, the whole world would. Chapter 2. The Tale of Echo and Narcissus. Long ago, in an age when the world was still young and the earth was a vast canvas of rolling hills, dense forests, and sparkling rivers, there lived a mountain nymph named Echo. She was a spirit of the woods, a gentle creature with a heart full of laughter and a voice as soft and clear as the gentle breeze that danced through the leaves at dawn. Echo was beloved by all who knew her. The birds would sing melodies in her honor, the deer would pause their grazing to watch her graceful footsteps, and the flowers seemed to bloom more brightly wherever she wandered. Her laughter was a delicate chime, like raindrops falling on the petals of wildflowers, filling the forest with light and joy. She spent her days roaming through the deep woods, tracing her fingers along the bark of ancient trees and listening to the soft murmur of the streams. The sunlight would sift down through the canopy above, painting the forest floor in patches of golden shadow, and the air was always alive with the hum of life, the flutter of wings, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant call of an owl waking from its daytime rest. Echo loved to talk. Her voice carried through the trees like a gentle song, a thread weaving through the tapestry of the forest's sounds. But her endless chatter once brought her into the sight and wrath of Hera, queen of the gods. Hera was jealous and proud, quick to anger when her secrets were threatened. One day, as Echo chattered away, distracting Hera with her ceaseless words to protect Zeus's mischief, the goddess's fury was unleashed. She cursed Echo, taking away her ability to speak freely. From that moment, Echo could only repeat the last words spoken to her by others. Imagine how lonely this must have been, to be so full of words and feelings but to be trapped, only able to mirror the voices around her like an echo in a canyon, beautiful yet hollow. Yet Echo's spirit did not break. She continued to roam the woods, a whisper of herself, repeating the voices she heard, longing to connect but bound by her curse. Not far from the forest, in a village where the sun-warmed terracotta rooftops and the scent of olives hung in the air, lived a young man named Narcissus. He was known far and wide for his breathtaking beauty. His hair gleamed like spun gold in the sunlight, his eyes sparkled with the clarity of the deepest pools, and his smile could light even the darkest of days. Many admired Narcissus, and many wished to win his heart, but he was proud and distant. He saw himself as above others, a star that outshone all those around him. He rejected every suitor, every kind word, believing none were worthy of his love. The gods watched this pride and decided to teach Narcissus a lesson about humility and love. One day, after many had sought and failed to claim his heart, Narcissus came upon a quiet pool nestled deep within the forest. The water was still and clear, like a polished mirror, reflecting the sky, the trees, and most of all, Narcissus's own image. He knelt beside the pool and gazed down, captivated by the reflection. The face staring back at him was so beautiful, so perfect, that Narcissus felt an ache deep within his chest. He reached out, hoping to touch the image, but the water rippled and the face vanished. Day after day, he returned to the pool. He spoke softly to his reflection, sharing secrets and dreams, falling ever deeper in love with himself. But the love was unreturned, for it was but a reflection, a shadow without substance. Echo, wandering nearby, heard his voice and followed the sound. She longed to speak to him, to tell him of her love, but could only repeat his words. When Narcissus called out, "E who is there?" She echoed, "E who is there?" When he whispered, "E come to me," as she repeated, "E come to me," her voice trembling with hope and sadness. Their meeting was filled with longing and sorrow, Echo's love silent and unseen, Narcissus's love blind and unreturned. Over time, Echo's form faded, her presence growing fainter until only her voice remained, a soft echo carried on the wind and through the trees. Narcissus, unable to leave the spell of his own reflection, wasted away beside the pool. His story became a timeless lesson, a reminder that pride and self-love without humility can lead to loneliness and loss. So tonight, as you lie beneath your blankets, imagine the forest alive with gentle whispers, the soft echo of a voice carried on the breeze, and the still, clear pool reflecting the stars above. Let this story remind you to listen deeply, love kindly, and cherish the quiet voices that often speak the truest truths. Chapter 3: The Reluctant Journey of Philoctetes. My dear listener, as the night deepens and the world outside your window grows quieter, I invite you to lean back, close your eyes, and let this tale carry you along, gently, like a small wooden boat rocking on the softest waves. Tonight, we wander into a story the ancient Greeks told, though not one that often found itself in grand amphitheaters or on the lips of poets seeking applause. It is a quieter story, one that lingers more than it excites, and that, my friend, makes it perfect for us. This is the tale of Philoctetes, though, before we begin, don't trouble yourself with remembering the name too quickly. It's not the kind of name that demands quick recall. Rather, it sits, comfortably, in the back of the mind, like an old book on a shelf, waiting until you feel ready to take it down. Our story begins, not in a place of glory, not on a battlefield with the clang of swords and shouts of heroes, but instead on a lonely, rocky island where the wind hums a low, steady song through the cracks in the cliffs. The island was called Lemnos, though at the time, to Philoctetes, it might as well have been called the end of the world. Now, how did he end up there? That, too, is a story without the quick, dramatic turns one might expect. Philoctetes had been on his way to Troy, you see, part of the great Greek host that set sail to bring back the beautiful Helen, stolen away by Paris of Troy. But, and here is where our tale begins to slow, to breathe. During the voyage, as the fleet stopped along the way, he stepped onto a small island to take a break. It was the kind of stop where men stretch their legs, fetch fresh water, and enjoy a moment on steady land before returning to the rolling sea. While exploring the shore, he found a quiet cave. The coolness of the shadows drew him in from the bright, sunlit beach. And it was there, hidden in a corner of rock, that he found a snake. Not just any snake. This was one of the island's own guardians, they said. Its bite was not swift death, but something worse, a slow-burning, festering wound. The snake bit Philoctetes on the foot, and from that day onward, pain became his closest companion. The bite turned ugly, the flesh swelling and twisting, until the smell of it was something the other men could no longer bear. In the cramped quarters of a ship, far from fresh air, his cries and his wound became a burden. And so, one quiet morning, his shipmates, under orders from their leaders, left him on Lemnos. Alone. There's something almost too human in that, the way great armies will abandon a man for the sake of their mission. They promised, perhaps, that they would return. But as the sails pulled away, as the ships shrank into the blue horizon, Philoctetes was left with only the rocky hills, the salt wind, and the echo of the waves to keep him company. Now, the days on Lemnos were not cruel in the way deserts are cruel, nor as bitter as winter's icy grip. Instead, they were slow, repetitive. A cycle of small, quiet tasks, finding water from a trickling spring, gathering wood for fires, mending the same worn cloak to keep out the wind. His foot throbbed endlessly. Sometimes the pain was so deep it felt as if the earth itself was pressing against the wound, testing his will. Other times, he could almost forget, until he moved the wrong way or tried to walk too far. I imagine him, there on the shore, staring out at the endless sea. The days might have blurred together, one sunrise looking much like the last, one sunset identical to the one before it. The same rocks, the same gulls circling overhead, crying into the wind. The same stars that watched silently, night after night. And in the long hours between sleep and waking, perhaps he wondered whether anyone even remembered him at all. You see, my friend, there is a peculiar sort of boredom that comes with being utterly alone. It's not the boredom of a dull lecture or an empty afternoon. It is heavier, slower, like a thick blanket you can't quite push off. It seeps into the bones, making time itself feel sluggish. Philoctetes had with him one precious possession, the bow and arrows of Heracles, the very hero who had once saved the world from monsters. These weapons had been a gift to Philoctetes, and they were his pride. Even alone, he would polish the bow, check the arrows, and practice his aim against driftwood or the bark of old trees. They were his link to something greater, to the world he had lost. Years passed like this. Not weeks. Not months. Years. And as you listen now, you might imagine the seasons turning slowly over him. Spring would arrive first, gentle and green, with fresh grass sprouting in the cracks of the hills and the air carrying the smell of blooming flowers from somewhere far away. Then summer, hot and dry, the rocks warm beneath his feet and the cicadas singing endlessly in the heat. Autumn would bring a gold-tinged light and the crunch of leaves, not many, for Lemnos was sparse with trees, but enough to remind him of change. And finally, winter would return with its cold winds, making his small cave a refuge once more. Through it all, Philoctetes endured. His days became so predictable that even the arrival of a new goal or a shift in the tides was something worth noticing. His wound never truly healed. Some days it would seem better, others, the pain would come back sharper than before, making him wince at every step. And then, one day, after many, many years, sails appeared again on the horizon. He must have blinked against the sun, wondering if they were a mirage. But no, they were real. A Greek ship had come, carrying old comrades. And what did they want? Not to rescue him out of pity, not to right the wrong of leaving him behind, but because the gods had whispered a prophecy, the Greeks could not win the war without the bow of Heracles. They came to him, speaking soft words, promising honor and a place in the final victory. But Philoctetes, well, he had not forgotten. He had not forgotten the long years of solitude, the abandonment, the way they had turned their backs when he needed them most. Still, after long talks and the persuasion of the young hero Neoptolemus, he agreed. The war at Troy awaited, and the bow would sing in battle once more. He left the island, limping, slower than he had once been, but not without looking back one last time at the place that had shaped him. And so, my friend, that is the story of Philoctetes. Not a tale of grand adventure, but of years spent in the quiet company of pain, patience, and the slow ticking of time. It is a myth without rushing chariots or roaring gods, but one that speaks softly of endurance, the kind that lasts far beyond the moment of action. Now, let us rest a moment before we drift toward the next tale. The sea is calm, and the night is long. Chapter 4. The Myth of Daedalus and Icarus. Once upon a time, in ancient Greece, in a world where gods and mortals walked side by side, there lived a man named Daedalus. He was a master craftsman and inventor, known far and wide for his incredible skill and boundless creativity. His hands could shape wood, stone, and metal into wonders that seemed almost magical. Daedalus was clever beyond measure. He could carve statues so lifelike they seemed to breathe, build mechanisms that moved with the grace of living creatures, and devise labyrinths so intricate that none could find their way through. People whispered stories of his genius, and kings sought his talents for their greatest projects. But Daedalus was more than just an artist and inventor. He was a father, too, with a young son named Icarus. Icarus was curious and full of life, his eyes shining with the wonder of youth and his heart eager for adventure. Daedalus loved his son dearly and taught him all he knew, hoping to pass on his wisdom and skill. One day, Daedalus was summoned by King Minos of Crete, a mighty and proud ruler who commanded great power over the island. Minos had a problem that only Daedalus could solve. He needed a labyrinth, a maze so complex that none who entered could ever find their way out. This labyrinth would serve as a prison for a terrible creature known as the Minotaur, a being with the body of a man and the head of a bull, born of a curse and fierce in its strength. Daedalus accepted the king's challenge and set to work. 4 days and nights, he toiled, sketching designs, shaping stones, and building walls. He crafted corridors that twisted and turned, dead ends that confused and confounded, and secret chambers hidden deep within the maze. The labyrinth became a marvel, a puzzle without equal, both beautiful and fearsome. When the labyrinth was finished, the Minotaur was locked inside, and the island of Crete lived in an easy peace, for none dared to enter the maze and face the beast within. But Daedalus's troubles had only just begun. King Minos feared that Daedalus might reveal the secrets of the labyrinth to others, or even help prisoners escape. So, he imprisoned Daedalus and Icarus within the island, trapping them so they could never leave. Daedalus was a man of great ingenuity, however, and he refused to despair. He began to think of a way to escape the island, to fly free from the prison of stone and sea. He gathered feathers from the birds that soared above and bound them carefully together with wax he melted himself. He fashioned 2 pairs of wings, one for himself and one for Icarus. With great care, he attached the wings to their arms, testing their strength and balance. Before they took flight, Daedalus warned Icarus, My son, listen well. When we take to the sky, you must not fly too close to the sun, for its heat will melt the wax and your wings will fail. Nor must you fly too low, for the spray of the sea will soak the feathers and weigh them down. Fly in the middle path, steady and true. Icarus nodded eagerly, his heart pounding with excitement. The thought of flying filled him with joy and wonder. And so, on a morning when the sky was painted with soft pinks and golds, Daedalus and Icarus spread their wings and lifted into the air. The wind sang through their feathers, and the sea sparkled far below. They rose higher and higher, feeling the thrill of freedom and the thrill of flight. But Icarus, caught up in the thrill, forgot his father's warning. His heart urged him upward, toward the blazing sun that shone like a golden orb in the sky. He soared higher and higher, laughing with delight as the warmth of the sun kissed his skin. Suddenly, the wax that held his wings together began to melt. Feathers loosened and drifted away on the breeze. Icarus's wings faltered, and he began to fall, faster and faster, toward the cold, dark sea below. Daedalus cried out, helpless, as his son disappeared beneath the waves. His heart broke, but he pressed on, flying alone until he reached safety. The story of Daedalus and Icarus is a tale of creativity and courage, of love and loss, and of the delicate balance between daring and caution. As you lie beneath your blanket tonight, imagine the vast blue sky stretching endlessly above, the gentle breeze lifting you up, and the warm golden sun shining softly. Let this story carry you gently into dreams of flight and freedom, with the warmth of a father's love guiding you safely home. After Daedalus fashioned the wings, the morning sun was just beginning to cast a warm golden glow over the island of Crete. The sea below was calm, its surface sparkling like scattered jewels under the light. The air smelled fresh, filled with the scents of wild herbs and salt. Daedalus helped Icarus strap the wings firmly to his arms, checking each feather carefully. Remember, my son, he said softly, this flight is not just a leap of the body, but of the mind and heart. Fly wisely and with care. Icarus's eyes shone bright with a mixture of excitement and nerves. His youthful spirit danced within him, eager to take on the world beyond the island's shores. Together, they climbed to the highest cliff overlooking the sea. From that height, the world stretched far and wide, a patchwork of blues and greens, waves lapping gently at rocky edges, and clouds drifting lazily overhead. With a deep breath, Daedalus took the first step forward and launched himself into the sky. The wind caught his wings, lifting him upward with a soft rush. He felt a rush of exhilaration and relief, the taste of freedom after so long imprisoned. Icarus followed close behind, his laughter ringing out like bells in the bright air. He flapped his wings with growing confidence, soaring higher and higher. The sun's rays warmed his skin, and the thrill of flying filled his heart with joy. But as they ascended, Icarus's excitement grew beyond control. He forgot his father's steady warnings and climbed toward the blazing sun. The heat began to melt the wax binding his wings. Feathers loosened and floated away, drifting like delicate snowflakes on a summer breeze. Panic gripped Icarus as he felt the wings faltering beneath him. His arms flailed, and then the air gave way as he plunged downward toward the shimmering sea. Below, Daedalus cried out in anguish, watching helplessly as his son fell. The waves closed over Icarus's form, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Daedalus circled in grief, mourning the loss of his beloved boy. His wings carried him onward, but his heart remained heavy with sorrow. The sea where Icarus fell came to be known as the Icarian Sea, a place of memory and warning to all who would dare to reach for the heavens without care. The story of Daedalus and Icarus carries many lessons: the brilliance of human creativity, the boundless spirit of youth, and the importance of heeding wisdom and caution. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the gentle wind beneath your wings, the warmth of the sun on your face, and the soft song of the sea below. Let the story lull you into peaceful dreams, cradled by love and the promise of new horizons. Chapter 5: Myrmidon and the People of Ants. Now, dear listener, tuck yourself in and let the rustling hum of the night wrap around you. Tonight's story is a slow walk through one of those myths you don't often hear about at bustling dinner parties or in dramatic movies. It's quiet, a little strange, and, like a worn old seashell found on the beach, it has a beauty that only reveals itself if you take the time to hold it close and listen. Our scene opens on a small island called Aegina, resting like a green jewel upon the deep blue waters of the Saronic Gulf. The air is soft here, full of the faint salt of the sea and the sweet smell of pine trees that sway lazily in the warm wind. Birds dip and glide over the coves, their wings catching flashes of gold from the sun. But this peaceful island hasn't always been so gentle. Long before, Aegina was home to many happy, thriving people. Farmers tilled the earth and coaxed figs from the branches, fishermen cast their nets into glittering waters, and children chased one another along dusty paths. Life moved at the easy pace of seasons, until, as so often happens in Greek myths, the gods took notice. You see, Zeus, king of the gods, was particularly fond of this island because it was named after a nymph he loved, Aegina herself. She had once been carried here by Zeus, far from the crowded lands of her birth. They say he brought her to this island so they could be alone, where the sea whispered only to them. But such divine affection often draws trouble, and trouble arrived in the form of Hera, Zeus's wife, whose jealousy could roll in heavier than a summer storm. One day, Hera, simmering with that quiet, dangerous anger that needs no words, decided she would punish the island. And so, with the kind of cold precision only a goddess can wield, she sent a terrible plague. It was not the fevered blaze of war or the sudden destruction of earthquakes. No, this was a slow and patient undoing. Day by day, the people sickened. Their laughter faded, the chatter in the market grew quiet, and the fields, once tended by many hands, lay abandoned. The island emptied. By the time Hera's cruel work was done, only one man remained alive. His name was Aeacus, the son of Zeus and Aegina. Imagine the silence he faced, stepping out of his home each morning to find the streets empty, the wells still, and the fields stretching away with no one to tend them. Even the sea seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Aeacus loved his island dearly, but how could an island live without people? And so, he climbed to the highest point of the island, a hill from which he could see the wide spread of the sea in every direction. There, he called upon his father, Zeus. His voice rose into the bright sky, and he prayed not for gold, not for glory, but for companions, for a community to fill the silence again. Now here is the strange and lovely part. As Aeacus stood in prayer, his eyes drifted to the ground, where ants were marching in a thick, wriggling line along the dirt. They moved in perfect order, each carrying its small burden, each working without complaint. Aeacus, in his loneliness, looked at these tiny creatures and thought, if only my island had people as hardworking and loyal as these ants. The gods, as you know, have their ways of hearing thoughts that are never spoken aloud. Zeus heard his son's longing and decided to grant it in the most literal way possible. That night, as Aeacus slept, the ants began to change. Their slender black forms stretched and grew, legs shaping into arms and legs, tiny antennae giving way to human faces. In the quiet darkness, the island filled with new life. When Aeacus awoke the next morning, he was met with the sight of men and women standing in the sunlight, blinking at the world for the first time. They were strong and quick, with a discipline and unity unlike any other people. They worked together as one, just as the ants had. Aeacus called them the Myrmidons, from the Greek myrmex, meaning ant. Now, this might seem like a happy ending, and in a way, it was. The island was alive again. Fields were tilled, homes were rebuilt, and laughter once more rang through the streets. But the story of the Myrmidons doesn't end quietly on Aegina. These were the same Myrmidons who, generations later, would follow Achilles into the Trojan War, their loyalty as unbreakable as the ants they came from. You might expect the Myrmidons to be warm and gentle like the community-minded ants they once were. But in war, their unity made them fierce. They moved as one body, striking where their leader struck, holding the line without falter. To their enemies, it must have been like facing a swarm, silent, precise, unstoppable. And yet, I like to think that somewhere in their hearts, perhaps in quiet moments between battles, they still carried that deep instinct to build, to work, and to care for their own. Perhaps some of them longed for the peaceful days of their ancestors, back when the islander smelled of pine and salt, and the only swarming they did was along the dusty parts in search of food. So, as we let this story settle in the mind, remember that myths often hide a quiet truth. In the tale of the Myrmidons, we find a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked creatures can inspire greatness. That loyalty, hard work, and unity are as mighty as any spear or shield. And perhaps, just perhaps, there's something comforting in the thought that even when the world feels empty and silent, life can return in the most unexpected ways, even if it comes crawling on 6 tiny legs before standing tall beside you. Chapter 6. The Tale of Arion and the Kindly Dolphin. Let us drift back, far beyond the bustle of the present world, to a time when the Aegean Sea was not just a stretch of blue water between lands, but a living stage for the stories of gods, mortals, and creatures both wondrous and strange. The winds along its coastlines were gentler then, or so the old storytellers like to claim, and the salt-scented or carried whispers of adventure, music, and fate. In that age, there lived a man named Arion. Arion was no warrior, no king, no famed builder of temples. His gift was something softer, more fleeting. He was a musician. And not just any musician, mind you, but the most celebrated lyre player of his time. The lyre, with its wooden frame and strings stretched taut over a soundbox, was not merely an instrument in his hands. It was an extension of his voice, a bridge between mortal hearts and the divine ear of Apollo himself. They say Arion was born in the city of Methymna on the island of Lesbos, a place already known for its poets and singers. From boyhood, he was surrounded by the cadence of waves, the calls of seabirds, and the distant melodies of temple flutes drifting across the hills. But it was the lyre that captured his soul. He learned to coax from it not only tunes to stir the heart, but also melodies that seemed to still the wind and hush the sea. As Arion grew, so too did his fame. He played in crowded marketplaces where traders from Egypt and Phoenicia paused in their bargaining to listen. He performed at royal feasts where kings set down their wine cups, leaning forward in wonder as he plucked each note. The stories say that when he played, even the fish in the harbors swam closer to the shore, drawn by music they could not name. Now, music, like the sea, invites travel. And in those days, gifted artists often sought the courts of faraway rulers who would reward them with gold, fine clothes, and a place of honor at the table. Arion was no different. His fame carried across the waters to Corinth, where the tyrant Periander ruled. Periander, though known for his stern and calculating nature, had an ear for beauty and an appreciation for art. When word reached him of Arion's skill, he sent an invitation, or perhaps more accurately, a command, that Arion should come to his court. And so Arion journeyed to Corinth, bringing with him only his lyre and a spirit eager for new audiences. The reception was all he could have hoped for. In the great hall of Periander's palace, he performed before nobles, courtiers, and ambassadors from distant lands. His music softened even the hardest expressions, and the hall often echoed with applause. Gold coins and fine gifts piled at his feet, tokens of the ruler's gratitude and the people's delight. But like the tide, fortunes rise and fall. After some years in Corinth, Arion grew restless. The Aegean called him home. Perhaps it was the longing for the familiar rhythms of Lesbos, or the wish to see again the harbours where he had first played as a boy. And so he made ready to return, his lyre safely packed, his purse heavy with the wealth he had earned. Here, the story takes a darker turn, for not all who smile at music's beauty have kindness in their hearts. Arion arranged passage on a Corinthian ship bound for Lesbos. The sailors, at first, were all easy grins and hearty talk. But as the days passed and the islands slipped by, their gazes began to linger on the purse of gold Arion carried. It was a dangerous thing, travelling with wealth on open waters, where the law was no stronger than the strongest man aboard. One evening, as the sun slid down in a wash of gold and crimson, the captain came to Arion with a grim proposal. He and the crew, he said, had decided it would be best if Arion gave them his wealth and his life. There would be no witnesses, no questions asked. A tragic accident at sea, they would say. Arion, stunned, pleaded for mercy. But the sea is not a place for pleading, not when greed has already salted the hearts of men. Still, Arion was clever. If he could not fight them with strength, perhaps he could win a final moment with his true gift. He asked them for one last request, that he might play his lyre and sing a final song before they killed him. The sailors, amused or perhaps curious, agreed. After all, what harm could a dying man do with music? And so Arion stood at the stern, the sea stretching endless before him, the wind stirring his hair. He tuned his lyre slowly, as if each note might delay his fate by a heartbeat. Then he began to play. The music rose like a prayer, each note trembling in the dusk light. He sang of the gods, of the wide unending sea, of the fleeting beauty of life and the certainty of death. The melody was unlike anything the sailors had heard, mournful, yet full of light, as though it came from somewhere far beyond mortal reach. When the final note faded, Arion did not wait for them to strike. Instead, he leapt, lyre in hand, into the dark embrace of the water. The sailors, certain he would drown, did not bother to search. But the gods, it seems, had other plans. For in that moment, a dolphin rose from the deep, its smooth back breaking the waves. Drawn by the music it had heard through the water, the creature swam to Arion's side. Without hesitation, Arion climbed onto its back, clinging tight as the dolphin sped away from the murderous ship. The journey was long and strange. The sea at night is both a friend and a terror. The stars wheeled above, and the water whispered against the dolphin's sides. Arion, soaked and shivering, spoke softly to his rescuer, as though the creature could understand. Perhaps it did. In the slow hours before dawn, they reached the shores of Greece. The dolphin swam close enough for Arion to wait to land, and with a final flick of its tail, it was gone, slipping back into the deep. Arion, safe but exhausted, made his way to Corinth to tell Periander of the treachery. When the ship finally returned, the sailors were called before the ruler, who confronted them with the truth. Faced with the impossible, for how could Arion be standing before them alive? They confessed. Justice was swift, though the old stories differ on what form it took. And as for Arion, his fame only grew. Statues were made of him riding a dolphin, and the tale was told for generations, a reminder that sometimes the sea, for all its dangers, holds kindness too. Chapter 7. The Tale of Pygmalion and the Living Statue. Close your eyes, my friend, and imagine we are walking along a sunlit shore of Cyprus. The air is gentle, with the scent of wild thyme and the faint salt of the sea curling in the breeze. The waves lap slowly against the sand, and the cry of a distant gull seems to echo through time itself. This is not just any shore. This is the island where marble dreams once took shape, where an artist's hands mold more than stone, they mold destiny. Our story begins with a man named Pygmalion, a gifted sculptor unlike any other in the world. His workshop was small, perched high on a hill where sunlight poured in through an open arch, bathing his creations in gold each morning. Inside, statues of warriors, maidens, and gods stood frozen in perfect stillness, each carved so skillfully that one might expect them to breathe at any moment. But while others marveled at his genius, Pygmalion felt a certain hollowness in his heart. You see, Pygmalion had grown weary of the people around him. He found their ways coarse, their hearts fickle, and their affections fleeting. He believed he could find no true companion among them. And so, he turned entirely to his art, letting marble and ivory speak where human voices could not. One day, as the golden afternoon stretched lazily toward evening, Pygmalion began work on a new sculpture. He did not know why this one was different. Perhaps it was the curve of the stone beneath his chisel, or the quiet inspiration of the sea below. But as his hands moved, a vision took form in his mind. He would create the perfect woman, not in flesh, but in flawless ivory. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Every morning, he would greet the unfinished figure with a soft smile, and every evening, he would leave the workshop reluctantly, as if parting from a dear friend. Her form emerged slowly, like the moon rising through clouds, delicate shoulders, graceful hands, a face both serene and alive with an unspoken warmth. When he finished, the statue stood in the center of the room, bathed in soft light. She seemed to listen, to breathe, though her gaze was fixed and still. Pygmalion named her Galatea. He draped her in fine cloth, braided her marble hair with garlands, and placed a pearl necklace gently around her neck. And then, something curious began to happen. Pygmalion found himself speaking to her as though she could hear. He told her about the shapes of clouds drifting over the island, about the fishermen who came to shore with their catches, about the dreams he had at night. He began to imagine her responses, the tilt of her head, the trace of a smile. His friends began to notice his absence from the taverns and markets. He spent his hours almost entirely in her company. Now, the goddess Aphrodite, who ruled over love itself, was no stranger to human hearts and their peculiar ways. From her temple by the sea, she watched Pygmalion with gentle curiosity. Here was a man who had sworn to shun all women, now pouring his heart into a figure of stone. She sensed something pure in his longing, a devotion not to lust, but to beauty, kindness, and a perfect soul he had imagined into being. On the festival day dedicated to Aphrodite, the people of Cyprus filled the air with music, flowers, and the scent of burning incense. Pygmalion, though reluctant to leave Galatea, decided to visit the temple. Perhaps, deep inside, he carried a small hope he dared not voice. In the temple's warm, flickering light, he approached the altar. His offering was modest, a garland of the freshest roses, but his prayer was whispered with such sincerity that Aphrodite herself felt it stir the air around her statue. "Goddess," he murmured, his voice trembling, "if you can grant me anything, let it be this. Give me a wife as lovely, as kind, as pure as the figure I have carved." He could not bring himself to ask for the statue to live, for even in his heart, such a wish seemed too impossible to name aloud. But Aphrodite knew. And as Pygmalion left the temple, the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over everything. When he returned to his workshop, he paused at the threshold. Something felt different. The air was still, yet charged, as though the world was holding its breath. Galatea stood where he had left her, her eyes catching the last rays of the sun. He stepped closer, and his fingers brushed against her hand, and to his astonishment, the ivory was warm. He pulled back in disbelief, then touched her again. This time, the smooth hardness of the stone seemed to soften beneath his fingers. The marble whiteness of her skin deepened into a gentle blush. Pygmalion's heart thundered in his chest as he reached for her cheek, and the statue turned her face toward him. Her eyes, once lifeless and fixed, now shone with light. Her lips parted, and she drew in her first breath. "Pygmalion," she whispered, though he had never told her name aloud. The sculptor fell to his knees, tears blurring his vision. He took her hands, warm, trembling, alive, and held them to his face. Aphrodite had granted his wish, not with a woman like his statue, but by giving life to the statue itself. In the days that followed, the people of Cyprus marveled at the miracle. Pygmalion and Galatea were wed in Aphrodite's temple, garlands of fresh flowers entwined in her hair, the sea murmuring its eternal blessing in the distance. And though many years passed, the devotion between them never dimmed. Some say they lived quietly on the shore, Pygmalion still shaping works of art, but never again with such longing, for the masterpiece of his life now walked beside him. Others say Aphrodite favored them so deeply that their home was always filled with beauty, roses blooming out of season, the air fragrant and warm even in the heart of winter. And so, my friend, the waves still whisper their story along the shores of Cyprus, where love proved stronger than marble, and a dream was breathed into life. Chapter 8: Orpheus and Eurydice, a song for the shadows. There are tales in the world that are whispered rather than told, stories that move not with the clatter of swords nor the roar of battle, but with the soft murmur of wind over grass, with the trembling touch of fingers brushing against a lyre's strings. One such story comes from the heart of ancient Greece, and it is about a man whose music could charm the very stones into dancing, and a love so deep that even the kingdom of death could not silence it. His name was Orpheus. The world knew him not just as a musician, but as the musician, the one whose songs were not merely heard, but felt. They say that when Orpheus played his lyre, rivers slowed their course to listen. Trees bent their branches closer, as if trying to embrace the sound. Birds fell silent in mid-song, not out of fear, but in reverence, their own voices stilled so his might fill the air without competition. Even the wildest beasts, lions, wolves, and great bears, would approach him not with bared teeth but with softened eyes, sitting near him like tame companions, lulled by his gentle melodies. It is said that Orpheus inherited his gift from his mother, Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, and perhaps from Apollo himself, who once gifted the boy with the golden lyre that would become an extension of his very soul. But Orpheus's true magic was not in the instrument, nor even in his voice. It was in the way he believed in every note. Each song was not a performance. It was a confession, a dream, a living fragment of his heart. And then, he met Eurydice. Eurydice. There is little in the old stories about the days before she knew Orpheus, perhaps because once they met, those days no longer mattered. She was a nymph of the forests, though no ordinary one. The poets say she walked as though the earth itself sighed beneath her feet. Her laughter was not loud, but it had a way of lingering in the mind, as though it had been woven into the listener's memory. She loved the quiet places, meadows brushed with wildflowers, clear streams where the water chuckled softly over stones, glades where the afternoon sunlight lay warm upon moss. And it was in such a place that Orpheus first saw her. It was a spring afternoon, the kind where the air carries the faint perfume of new blossoms and the promise of summer. Orpheus sat upon a stone beside a brook, idly plucking at his lyre, letting his thoughts wander into music. He had no audience but the trees, or so he thought. Then, as a cloud shifted and sunlight spilled more brightly into the clearing, he saw her. Eurydice. She was kneeling beside the water, gathering flowers into a loose, careless bundle, the kind one makes not for ceremony but for joy. A few strands of her hair had fallen forward, catching the light like threads of gold. She did not yet see him, and he could not look away. Orpheus began to play, not the bold, triumphant music he sometimes wove for kings, but something quieter. A song as soft as the whisper of leaves overhead, as gentle as the ripple of water against stone. Eurydice's hands stilled. Slowly, she lifted her head. Their eyes met across the brook. The poets might call it love at first sight. But in truth, it was something quieter than that, and deeper. It was recognition. As though each had been walking alone in a half-lit world, and suddenly the other had brought the sun. The days that followed were like the notes of a single song, flowing one into the next without pause. Orpheus and Eurydice walked the meadows together. He played for her in the cool of the evenings, and in the warm hush of mornings before the dew had lifted. She wove garlands for him, laughing when the flowers slipped and tangled into his hair. They spoke little of the future, for in those moments, it seemed unnecessary. The present was enough. When they wed, it was not in a hall of marble but in the very fields and forests that had brought them together. The air was thick with the scent of blossoms, and the sky was a vast blue dome overhead. Orpheus played as they walked hand in hand, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with joy. But the fates, as they often do in such stories, were watching. And joy, they say, can be as fragile as a butterfly's wing. It happened not long after their wedding. Eurydice was wandering through a meadow, the hem of her dress brushing against the long grass. Some say she was with companions, others that she was alone. What is certain is that she did not see the serpent until it struck. Its fangs sank deep, and though she cried out, the sound was swallowed by the open air. She fell, the flowers spilling from her hands. By the time Orpheus found her, she was still. Too still. There are moments in life so sharp, so sudden, that the mind refuses to accept them. Orpheus knelt beside her, calling her name again and again as though she might simply wake, as though his voice might summon her back. But her breath did not stir. Her eyes did not open. In the days that followed, the music stopped. The lyre lay silent. Orpheus wondered, not knowing where his feet carried him. The world had lost its color. The trees stood mute. The streams no longer seemed to laugh. But then a thought began to grow in him, small at first, like a seed in the dark. What if he could bring her back? And so he decided to do the unthinkable. He would journey to the underworld. It was not a place for the living. Few who entered ever returned. But Orpheus was not guided by courage, only by love, and the refusal to accept that a final goodbye had been spoken. He walked until the earth grew cold beneath his feet, until the sky dimmed to a permanent twilight. He came to the mouth of a cave, the passage to Hades. The air that flowed from it was heavy, carrying the scent of stillness, of silence so deep it could swallow a man whole. Inside, the world was shadow. Orpheus's steps echoed faintly as he descended, his lyre clutched close. He passed the shades of the dead, pale figures drifting like mist. Some turned to watch him, their eyes hollow with surprise. A living man among them was a rare sight. Then came the first of the underworld's guardians, Cerberus, the three-headed hound. Its growls rumbled like distant thunder, each head watching him with eyes like coals. Orpheus did not reach for a weapon. Instead, he began to play. The notes were low at first, almost tentative, then grew into a melody both mournful and soothing. Cerberus's ears twitched. One head lowered its gaze, another closed its eyes, the third gave a sound that was almost a sigh. Slowly, the great hound lay down, the music wrapping around it like a lullaby. Orpheus passed unharmed. Deeper he went, until he stood before the black river Styx. Charon, the ferryman, waited in his boat, his face unreadable. Orpheus played again, and though Charon said nothing, he held out his hand for the coin Orpheus carried and let him aboard. At last, Orpheus stood before Hades and Persephone, rulers of the underworld. Their thrones were carved from shadow and stone. The air was heavy with the weight of uncounted years. Orpheus bowed his head. Then he began to play. This was not a song of triumph, nor even of hope. It was the sound of love laid bare, of longing so deep it ached, of mournings never to be shared, of laughter that had been silenced too soon. He played until the air itself seemed to tremble, until even the cold faces of the dead softened. Persephone's eyes grew wet. Hades himself sat motionless, his gaze distant. When the last note faded, there was a silence deeper than any before. Then Hades spoke. "Take her," he said. "But on one condition, you must not look back until you have both reached the world above. If you turn, she will be lost to you forever." Orpheus's heart soared. He turned and began to walk, hearing the soft tread of Eurydice's feet behind him. The path back was long, winding upward through the darkness. His breath quickened, his hands trembled on the lyre. But doubt is a quiet thing, and it grows in silence. Was she truly there? Was it her footsteps he heard, or only the echo of his own? The light of the world above was just ahead when the fear became too much. He turned. And in that instant, she was there, her face pale but smiling, her hand almost reaching his, and then she was gone. Drawn back into the shadows, her eyes still on him until the darkness swallowed her whole. Orpheus stood frozen. The silence roared in his ears. Slowly, he set down his lyre, and did not pick it up again for a very long time. They say he wandered the earth after that, playing only the softest songs, each one carrying a fragment of her voice, her laughter, her light. The world still listened. But for Orpheus, the music was no longer a gift, it was a remembrance. And so his story became a song in itself. A song of love, of loss, and of the moment when even the greatest music cannot change the will of the fates. Chapter 9. Orpheus and Eurydice, the song that tried to outplay death. Let us go slowly now, my friends. Slowly, as though we are stepping barefoot through the soft grass of an ancient meadow in Greece, the kind of meadow that feels like the beginning of a dream. It is early morning, and the sun is rising above the gentle, rolling hills, sending golden light over the valleys. There is a hush in the air, as if nature itself is holding its breath for the tale I am about to tell you, a tale of music, of love so deep it dared to challenge the underworld itself, and of the kind of beauty that can make even the heart of Hades tremble. Before we speak of Orpheus himself, you must understand the world he was born into, for no story grows out of nothing. The land of ancient Thrace, his home, was wild and lush, covered in forests that hummed with cicadas in the summer and rivers that sang as they slipped over smooth stones. The people there believed the gods were everywhere, in the wind, in the mountains, in the flame of the hearth, and most especially in the arts, in song, in poetry, in the sound of a lyre's strings beneath skillful fingers. Orpheus's father was said to be Aegis, a Thracian king, but others whispered that his father was none other than Apollo, the god of music himself. His mother, Calliope, was the muse of epic poetry, one of the 9 muses who inspired mortals to create works worthy of the gods. From her, Orpheus inherited not only talent, but a soul finely tuned to beauty, a heart sensitive to every rustle of leaves, every shift in the color of the sky, every unspoken feeling in another's eyes. From a young age, Orpheus showed signs that he was unlike any other boy in Thrace. While other children played with sticks or chased each other through the fields, Orpheus would sit alone by a stream, strumming on a small lyre his mother had given him, weaving notes together as naturally as breathing. When he played, it was as though the world itself listened. Birds would land nearby, tilting their heads to hear better. Deer would step silently from the trees, their ears flicking toward the sound. Even the river seemed to slow, its bubbling growing quieter, as though it wished not to interrupt. As he grew, his skill deepened until it seemed no living thing could resist his music. Farmers found their oxen stopping mid-plough to turn their heads toward him. Shepherds swore their sheep would gather in perfect circles around him whenever he sang. Sailors claimed the sea was calmer when Orpheus played on the shore. Some even said that stones would shift, rolling closer to hear him, and that ancient trees would lean toward him, their leaves whispering in the wind. But music, for Orpheus, was never just music. It was the purest form of truth, a language beyond words. And in that truth lay joy, and sorrow, and longing. Perhaps that is why, when he met Eurydice, he recognized her not merely with his eyes, but with his soul, as though a missing note in his life's melody had finally been played. Eurydice was not a goddess. She was not a princess. She was a nymph, one of the daughters of the earth and the water, with hair like river foam and eyes that caught the light like polished amber. She moved with a grace that was unstudied, natural, the way vines grow along a wall, the way water finds the easiest path downhill. She loved the fields and forests, the quiet of the morning, and the laughter of her friends as they gathered flowers. The first time Orpheus saw her, she was walking barefoot through a meadow, her arms full of wildflowers. The sight of her stopped him mid-step, as though the world had suddenly become too beautiful to move through quickly. He lifted his lyre without thinking and began to play, not a song he knew, but one that rose from the moment itself, like a spring bubbling up from the ground. It was a melody that spoke of sunlight on water, of petals drifting on the wind, of the hush before a summer storm. Eurydice turned toward the sound. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them, something that needed no explanation. It was not long before they became inseparable. They walked together through the forests, Orpheus playing as Eurydice sang softly beside him. They sat by rivers, talking until the sun went down and the stars came out, one by one. When the moon rose, Orpheus would play under its silver light, and Eurydice would lie beside him, her head on his shoulder, listening to the music as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Their love was not loud or boastful. It was not the kind of love that seeks to prove itself. It was quiet, steady, and deep, like the slow turning of the seasons, like the patient growth of a tree. And when they married, it was in a simple ceremony, with the flowers of the meadow as their decoration and the song of Orpheus as the only music. But happiness, in the old myths, was rarely allowed to last long. The gods seemed to see joy as a fragile thing, something that must be tested, or perhaps they simply knew that in human life, joy and sorrow are always intertwined. The day it happened was warm and bright. Eurydice, with a few friends, had gone walking in the fields. Somewhere nearby, unseen, lurked Aristeus, a shepherd and minor guard who had become obsessed with her beauty. Some say he pursued her with unwanted advances. Others say it was a cruel trick of fate, with no villain at all. But in every telling, the result was the same. Eurydice ran through the grass, whether to flee or simply to laugh and play, and in her flight, she did not see the snake coiled in the tall meadow flowers. The bite was swift, and the venom was deadly. By the time her friends found Orpheus, Eurydice's breath had already slowed, her skin paling. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he tried to find a way to save her. But even his music, the music that had tamed wild beasts and swayed the very trees, could not call her back. She was gone. The days that followed were a blur of grief. Orpheus wandered through the fields they had walked together, past the stream where they had talked for hours, past the trees where she had leaned against the trunk and laughed at his jokes. But now, every place was hollow. Every note he played was full of longing. The world, once vibrant with colour, seemed drained to shades of grey. It was then that Orpheus made his decision, a decision no mortal had made before and returned to tell of. He would go to the underworld itself, to the realm of Hades, and bring her back. He began his journey at dawn, carrying only his lyre. His path took him to the edge of the world, where the living may approach the land of the dead. There, in a dark, still cave, the air grew cold, and the sound of the earth above faded into silence. This was the entrance to the underworld, a place no mortal could enter without fear. But Orpheus stepped forward, his fingers on the strings. And so, as the final echoes of this particular Greek tale fade into the long corridors of memory, we are left with the same mixture of wonder and quiet reflection that these old stories have stirred in listeners for thousands of years. The gods, the heroes, the mortals, all of them moving through lives that, though set in an age of marble temples and endless seas, still whisper of feelings we know today: longing, pride, love, envy, hope, and the endless search for meaning. The myths do not demand that we believe them as fact. Instead, they invite us to sit by their fireside and listen, to imagine the salt of the Aegean on the wind, the glint of starlight on bronze, the rustle of olive branches in the still night air. They are not hurried stories. They wander, they linger, they breathe. And perhaps that is why they survive, because life, too, is not always told in straight lines. So, with the last chapter closed, we lean back in our minds, letting the images drift away like ships disappearing over the horizon, their sails white against the fading gold of the sun. The sea grows quiet again, the voices fall silent, and we are left with a hush that follows the telling of an old story. Chapter 10: The Odyssey of Bellerophon and the Winged Pegasus. The wind over the Aegean was warm that morning, carrying with it the scent of thyme from the rocky hills and the faint, briny tang of the sea. In a time before the great cities of Greece had fully risen, when the gods still walked the land disguised as mortals, and when the boundaries between the human and the divine could be crossed in a heartbeat, there lived a young man whose name would be whispered in both reverence and warning for centuries to come: Bellerophon. No one could quite agree where he had been born. Some said Corinth, in the shadow of its proud citadel. Others swore it was Lycia, the land of rugged mountains and swift rivers. All agreed, however, that he was handsome beyond measure, with a noble bearing that made even strangers turn their heads as he passed. Yet his beauty was not the gentle sort. It was sharp-edged, the kind that seemed to promise glory but also hinted at danger. His eyes, a deep, stormy blue, often looked as though they were fixed on something far away, perhaps the horizon, perhaps a dream only he could see. Bellerophon was not merely handsome. He was skilled, a hunter, a horseman, a warrior in the making. He moved with a quiet confidence, like a man aware of his own strength but not yet certain of his destiny. And destiny, as it often does in the old Greek tales, was already weaving threads around him. A dangerous beginning. The first great twist in his life came from misfortune, or perhaps from the hands of the gods. There had been an accident, a terrible one. Some claimed that Bellerophon had slain a man, whether by design or chance, no one knew. In some tellings, the victim was his own brother, in others, merely a stranger. Either way, the weight of blood was upon his hands, and in ancient Greece, such a stain could not be ignored. To wash away the crime, Bellerophon had to seek purification. In those days, this was not simply a matter of apology or penance. It was a sacred ritual, a plea to the gods themselves to cleanse the soul. And so he travelled far from his homeland, coming at last to the court of Proetus, king of Tiryns, a man of keen intellect but a suspicious mind. At first, Proetus welcomed the young stranger. He saw in Bellerophon's bearing the signs of noble blood, and in his eyes the spark of potential. Yet, as so often happens in such stories, trouble was brewing, and it came from within the walls of the palace itself. The Queen's accusation. Proetus's wife, Sthenebia, or Antia, as some called her, was a woman of great beauty and cunning. She noticed the young guest almost at once. Whether it was his face, his quiet strength, or simply the allure of the unknown, she found herself drawn to him. In the stillness of the palace gardens, she spoke to him in whispers, offering him her favor, her affection, perhaps even her heart. But Bellerophon, whether out of loyalty to his host, or his own moral code, or simple disinterest, refused her advances. This was no small insult to a queen. Her desire, once rejected, twisted into a dangerous anger. She feared exposure, humiliation, the sting of rejection, and so she acted swiftly. Before the king, she accused Bellerophon of the very thing he had not done, of trying to seduce her, of dishonoring her and the royal household. Proetus, caught between the word of his queen and the laws of hospitality, found himself in a bind. In those days, a guest under one's roof was sacred. To harm them was to offend Zeus himself, the god of guests and hosts. But to ignore the word of a queen? That could lead to scandal, unrest, perhaps even rebellion. So Proetus devised a plan worthy of the old tragic tales. He would send Bellerophon to his ally and father-in-law, King Iobates of Lycia, carrying with him a sealed tablet, a message carved on thin plates of wood. This was no friendly letter. The words within instructed Iobates to kill the bearer. The journey to Lycia. The voyage to Lycia was long and filled with quiet tension. Bellerophon did not know that he carried his own death warrant in his pack. As he travelled over land and sea, the landscape unfolded before him, olive groves shimmering in the sun, shepherds leading their flocks along dusty paths, the great mountains of Lycia rising in the distance like the walls of the world. When he finally arrived at Iobates' court, the king welcomed him with the warmth and ceremony due to a noble guest. 4 days, they feasted, hunted, and shared tales. It was only after the formalities of hospitality had been fulfilled that Iobates finally unrolled the sealed tablet and read the words that chilled him. Kill the bearer of this message. Iobates, like Proetus, was bound by the laws of the gods. He could not simply slay his guest. But unlike Proetus, he had another idea, one that would satisfy the letter of the request while still sparing his own honor. If the young man were to die in battle against an impossible foe, then the gods themselves would have passed judgment. And so, with a careful smile, Iobates gave Bellerophon his first great task. The Chimera. In the mountains of Lycia, there lived, or rather, burned, a creature of nightmare, the Chimera. It was said to have the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. Its breath was fire, its temper legendary. It had devoured flocks, destroyed villages, and left blackened scars upon the land. Many had gone to slay it, none had returned. Defeat this beast, Iobates told him, ere you will have proven your worth. The challenge was clear. It was a death sentence dressed as a quest. But Bellerophon did not flinch. Something in his nature, perhaps pride, perhaps the whisper of fate, made him accept. Yet even the bravest warrior could not hope to face such a monster on foot. To meet the Chimera, he would need something extraordinary. The dream of Pegasus. That night, as he lay in the palace guest chamber, Bellerophon dreamed. In his dream, he stood by a quiet spring at the foot of Mount Helicon. The air was cool, the water pure, and the light around him seemed touched with divinity. Then, from the clouds above, came the sound of great wings. A figure emerged, not a man, not a god, but a creature of radiant beauty, Pegasus, the winged horse, white as snow and swifter than the wind. Pegasus landed before him, the ground trembling under his hooves, and regarded Bellerophon with dark, intelligent eyes. A voice, whether from the horse, the spring, or the heavens themselves, whispered, "The one who rides me shall conquer the unconquerable." When Bellerophon awoke, the image of Pegasus burned in his mind. He knew it was no ordinary dream. It was a message, perhaps even a gift, from the gods. The capture of Pegasus. But how does one catch a creature born from the blood of Medusa herself? Pegasus was not a beast to be tamed by mortal hands. The answer came from Polyaedos, a wise seer of Lycia, who told Bellerophon to sleep in the temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy. There, in the silence of sacred stone, Bellerophon prayed. Athena, moved by his devotion or perhaps by her own designs, appeared to him in the night. She placed in his hands a golden bridle, its reins glimmering with divine light. "With this," she told him, "you will master the winged one." And so, guided by the seer's words, Bellerophon found Pegasus drinking at the spring of Perrine in Corinth. The horse's wings shone in the morning light, his maner rippling like silver. Bellerophon approached slowly, the golden bridle held before him. Pegasus, sensing the touch of the gods upon it, did not flee. With a smooth motion, Bellerophon placed it over the horse's head, and in that instant, a bond was forged between man and steed that would echo through all of Greek legend. Chapter 11. The Tale of Phaeton, the Son of the Sun, a Journey of Fire and Fate. In the soft glow of a gentle dawn, long ago in the age when gods walked among mortals and the earth was full of mysteries, there was a boy named Phaeton. His name meant a shining or a radiant, and it was said he carried the very light of the sun in his heart. From the moment he opened his eyes to the world, there was something different about him, a flicker of gold in his hair, a spark of warmth in his gaze, as if the sun itself had kissed him with its gentle fire. Phaeton was born to climb in, a kind and loving nymph who lived by a slow, winding river where the willows whispered secrets to the breeze and dragonflies danced above the water's surface. She was a woman of quiet strength and tender heart, and from the earliest days, she knew her son was special. Yet she also knew the weight of divine blood could be both a blessing and a burden. Her stories to Phaeton were filled with wonder and magic, tales of gods who shaped the stars, of mighty heroes whose names echoed through valleys, and of the great chariot of Helios, the sun god, who rode across the sky each day, pulling the blazing sun behind him and bringing light and warmth to all living things. But as Phaeton grew, so too did the questions in his mind. Who was his father? Why did the sun seem to follow him everywhere he went? Why did he feel a fierce longing whenever the golden light bathed the land? These questions simmered like embers beneath his calm exterior, until one morning, beneath a sky painted in soft pastels by the rising sun, he gathered his courage and asked his mother the truth. "Mother," he said, his voice gentle but steady, "please tell me who my father is. I need to know where I come from." Clymene's eyes filled with both pride and sorrow as she looked upon her son. "Your father," she said slowly, "is Helios, the mighty god who drives his fiery chariot across the heavens each day, carrying the sun in his wake. You are his son, Phaeton, born of both mortal and divine blood." The revelation was like a flame kindling in Phaeton's chest. Suddenly, everything made sense. The golden glow in his hair, the warmth in his soul, the restless yearning in his heart. He was not just a boy of the earth. He was part of the sky, part of the sun itself. From that moment, a fire sparked within him, a desire to find his father, to stand before the radiant god, and to prove himself worthy. And so, with the blessing of his mother and the prayers of the river nymphs, Phaeton set out on a journey that would change his life forever. the journey to the palace of Helios. The path was long and winding, stretching far beyond the familiar forests and rivers of Phaeton's childhood. He travelled through meadows where wildflowers swayed like waves in the breeze, their petals glowing faintly in the morning light. He crossed rolling hills bathed in golden sunlight, where shepherds tended their flocks and the scent of thyme and lavender filled the air. As he journeyed, the world seemed to awaken around him, birdsong rising in delicate choruses, the whisper of trees sharing ancient secrets, and the soft murmur of streams weaving through the land like silver threads. Phaeton felt the pulse of life in every step, and yet his eyes were always drawn upward, toward the endless sky, where the sun traced its path across the heavens. Higher and higher he climbed, past rugged mountains whose peaks pierced the clouds like the spires of God's temples. The air grew thinner and cooler, crisp with the scent of pine and earth. The light shifted as he neared the summit, softening into a golden haze that seemed to hum with power. At last, he stood before the palace of Helios, a magnificent structure of shimmering gold and crystalline walls that glowed with an eternal light. The gates were open wide, forged from stars and dawn's first blush, inviting Phaeton to enter the realm of the sun. Inside, the air was warm and alive with the music of the spheres, a gentle symphony woven from the light of the cosmos itself. Helios sat upon a throne of radiant gold, his robes shimmering like molten sunshine, his eyes blazing with a light that could both warm and burn. Meeting Helios. Phaeton approached, his heart pounding like the wings of a great bird in flight. "Farther," he said softly, "I have come to know you, to learn who I am, and to take my place among the gods." Helios regarded him with a gaze that seemed to see both the past and future, the mortal and divine intertwined. "You are my son," he said, voice deep and warm like the summer sun. "The blood of the heavens runs through your veins. But to ride my chariot is no simple task. It requires strength, wisdom, and courage beyond mortal measure." Phaeton nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. "I will prove myself worthy. I will control the horses and keep the chariot on its path." The god of the sun considered his son for a long moment, then reached out and handed him the reins, golden and glowing with a power that hummed beneath Phaeton's fingers. "Remember your promise," Helios warned. "Keep your eyes forward. Do not stray from the path of the sun, or the world will suffer." With a deep breath, Phaeton mounted the chariot. The horses, magnificent creatures of fire and wind, snorted and pawed the ground, their manes flickering like flames. As the chariot surged forward, wings beating the sky like thunder, the earth below seemed to hold its breath. The ride of the sun. At first, the ride was more wonderful than Phaeton had imagined. The wind rushed past him, cool and exhilarating. The sky stretched out endlessly, a canvas painted with clouds and light. Forests and rivers, mountains and seas, all lay spread beneath him like a great tapestry woven by the gods themselves. But soon, the power of the chariot proved too great. The horses, sensing uncertainty in their rider, began to pull harder, racing closer to the earth. Flames leapt from the wheels, scorching the grass and trees below. Villages were singed by the brush of the fiery steeds, and the sky grew thick with smoke. Phaeton struggled to control the wild horses, his hands tightening on the reins, his heart pounding with fear and determination. He looked down and saw the world burning beneath him, forests aflame, rivers steaming, creatures fleeing in terror. He remembered his father's warning, "Do not stray from the path." But the horses pulled him off course, and the balance of the world began to unravel. The wrath of Zeus. From Mount Olympus, the great god Zeus watched the chaos unfolding with a heavy heart. The mortal boy had taken on a power too great for him, and the world was suffering because of it. With a thunderous roar that echoed across the skies, Zeus raised his mighty thunderbolt and hurled it at Phaeton. The bolt struck the chariot, shattering the reins and sending the boy tumbling through the air. Phaeton fell from the sky, a streak of fire against the blue, until he landed in the river Eridanus, which mourned his fall with a gentle song that still lingers in its waters today. The legacy of Phaeton. Though his life was brief, Phaeton's story is one of courage, longing, and the human desire to reach beyond limits. His journey reminds us that some fires burn too bright and must be handled with care. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine the warmth of the sun on your skin, the soft glow of dawn, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. Chapter 13. Daedalus and Icarus, Wings of Wax and Dreams of Flight. Long ago, when gods mingled with mortals and the world was young with endless possibilities, there lived a man named Daedalus. He was a master craftsman, a creator of wonders, whose hands could shape wood, stone, and metal into marvels that whispered stories of ingenuity and magic. In his workshop, sunlight would dance on intricate carvings, and shadows would play among the delicate tools that seemed almost alive in his skilled hands. Daedalus was renowned far and wide. Kings and queens sought his counsel, and artists envied his genius. His creations were not merely objects, but living tales woven from the fabric of dreams and intellect. Among his many wonders was the labyrinth, a maze so complex and confounding that no mortal could escape once inside. Yet, amidst all his glory, Daedalus's heart belonged most tenderly to his son, Icarus. Icarus was a boy of boundless curiosity and bright spirit, his eyes alight with wonder at the world. He loved to watch the birds soaring high above the hills, their wings slicing through the sky with effortless grace. Day after day, Icarus would plead with his father, Tell me, father, how do the birds fly? Can I fly too?" Daedalus would smile and tell him stories of the wind's embrace, of feathers catching sunlight, and of the delicate balance that made flight possible. But their peaceful life was shattered by misfortune. King Minos of Crete, fearful of Daedalus's knowledge and power, imprisoned father and son within the very labyrinth Daedalus had built, a twisting maze of stone walls and endless corridors. The days inside the labyrinth were long and filled with silence, broken only by distant echoes and the soft footsteps of a trapped pair. Yet, Daedalus's mind never ceased to work. He conceived a daring plan to escape by air. With feathers gathered from birds that nested nearby and wax softened by the warmth of the sun, Daedalus began to craft wings for himself and Icarus. Every feather was carefully selected and tied with fine thread, every piece of wax melted and molded to hold the structure together. When the wings were ready, Daedalus warned his son with gentle firmness, Icarus, you must listen well. Fly neither too low, where the sea's dampness will weigh you down, nor too high, where the sun's heat will melt the wax. Keep close to me, and we will escape together. With hearts pounding in anticipation and hope, they took flight, soaring up from the labyrinth and above the rocky cliffs of Crete. The wind sang around them, lifting their spirits as the world spread out like a vast tapestry beneath their wings. For a moment, they were free, not bound by walls or earth, but flying among the clouds, touching the sky with dreams and courage. But young Icarus, intoxicated by the thrill of flight and the vast blue above, began to climb higher and higher. The sun shone brighter as he approached, its golden rays growing fierce and warm. Ignoring his father's warnings, Icarus flew too close to the sun. The wax that held his wings began to soften and drip away. Panic surged through him as feathers loosened and the mighty wings faltered. With a cry that mingled fear and sorrow, Icarus tumbled from the sky, falling like a shooting star toward the restless sea below. Daedalus watched in horror and grief as his son disappeared beneath the waves, his heart breaking with a sorrow deeper than the ocean. Though his wings carried him safely away, Daedalus mourned the loss of his beloved Icarus, and the tale of their flight became a timeless story, a reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and caution, of dreams and limits, and of the love that soars beyond even the greatest fall. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the gentle wind lifting you softly, the warmth of the sun on your face, and the tender hope carried on wings made of dreams. Chapter 14. The Story of Persephone and the Seasons, a tale of light, darkness, and renewal. Long ago, before the rhythms of spring and autumn was set in stone, before the earth knew the gentle cycle of planting and harvest, there was a young goddess named Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, the nurturing goddess of the harvest and the earth, and her presence was like the first blossom of spring, delicate, radiant, and full of promise. Persephone lived in a world bursting with life, where flowers bloomed endlessly, rivers sang their flowing songs, and the sun kissed the earth with warm golden light. Her laughter was like the soft breeze that stirred the petals, and wherever she went, the land responded with vibrant colors and gentle growth. Demeter, her mother, was devoted to Persephone. Together, they wandered the meadows and forests, gathering blossoms and blessing the fields with fertility. The bond between mother and daughter was deep and tender, a sacred dance of love and life. Each morning, Persephone would rise with the dawn and step barefoot onto the soft earth. The grass tickled her skin as she wandered through the fields, where daisies and buttercups nodded in greeting. Birds trilled from the trees overhead, and the gentle hum of bees filled the air as they moved from flower to flower. The world was alive with possibility, and Persephone's heart beat in tune with every breath the earth took. Her laughter, bright and free, was a melody that seemed to awaken even the shyest blooms. Wherever Persephone walked, petals would unfurl in her wake, as if the land itself delighted in her presence. She loved the feel of soft moss beneath her feet and the cool touch of river water as she dipped her fingers into the flowing stream. Demeter watched her daughter with eyes full of love and pride. She taught Persephone the names of every flower, the secrets of the soil, and the ways of the seasons. They would sit together beneath ancient oaks, sharing stories of the earth's magic, how the sun and rain danced in harmony to bring forth life, how the stars above watched over all creatures with quiet grace. As spring stretched into summer, Persephone's days were filled with joy and discovery. She learned how to gather wild herbs and to sing songs that call the crops to grow tall and strong. Demeter's heart swelled with happiness, for she knew that one day her daughter would carry on the sacred work of tending the earth. But beneath this beauty and peace, a shadow lingered. A change was coming, one that would test the bonds of love and the very cycles of life. One afternoon, as Persephone wandered further than usual, seeking the sweetest blooms for a garland, the ground trembled beneath her feet. The air grew still and heavy, and the birds ceased their songs. From a chasm that opened silently in the earth, Hades emerged, the god of the underworld, cloaked in shadow and mystery. His eyes, dark yet filled with longing, met Persephone's. Without a word, he reached out and gently took her hand. The earth seemed to sigh as he led her downward, into the depths below, a realm of silence and shadows where souls lingered and time flowed differently. Persephone was afraid, yet something in the depths of her heart stirred with curiosity. The underworld was a place unlike the bright world she knew, quiet and somber, but also filled with a strange and solemn beauty. The walls glimmered with faint light, and the air was cool and still. Above ground, Demeter's grief was immediate and profound. The moment her daughter disappeared beneath the earth, the fields began to wither. Crops bowed their heads in sorrow, rivers slowed to a gentle murmur, and the sun's warmth felt distant and cold. The world slipped into a deep, restless winter. Demeter searched the earth tirelessly, her heart breaking with every passing day. She refused to rest or eat, wandering the lands in mourning. Her sorrow was so great that nothing could grow until her daughter was returned to her. The gods of Olympus were moved by Demeter's pain and the suffering of mortals. They sent Hermes, the swift messenger, to negotiate with Hades for Persephone's return. But Hades revealed a binding secret. Persephone had eaten the seeds of a pomegranate, a fruit sacred to the underworld. By partaking of food from that realm, she was bound to it. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades below and part with Demeter above. When Persephone returned to the surface, the earth blossomed anew, heralding spring and summer. When she descended again, the world fell into autumn and winter. Thus, the cycle of the seasons was born, a gentle rhythm of light and dark, growth and rest, woven into the very fabric of the earth. As you lie beneath your blanket tonight, imagine the soft petals of spring flowers opening slowly, the golden warmth of summer sunlight on your skin, the crisp rustle of autumn leaves, and the hush of winter snow falling quietly. All these moments are part of Persephone's story, a tale of love, loss, and the eternal dance of renewal. As Persephone stepped lightly through the meadows, the soft earth beneath her feet seemed to pulse with life. She paused often, brushing her fingers over the petals of wildflowers, feeling their delicate softness and breathing in their sweet fragrances. The gentle hum of bees and the flutter of butterflies surrounded her like a quiet song. Her mother, Demeter, watched fondly from a distance, her heart swelling with love. They often paused together beside crystal-clear streams, where Persephone would catch glimpses of her own reflection, framed by the dancing leaves overhead. These were moments of peace, a precious stillness shared between mother and daughter. One day, while weaving a crown of fresh blooms, Persephone felt a sudden chill in the air. The sky dimmed just enough to hush the birdsong, and a strange silence fell over the forest. Her heart quickened as the ground beneath her trembled faintly, and from the shadowed earth, Hades emerged, his eyes shining with quiet resolve. Though fear gripped her, Persephone did not resist. Something in Hades' solemn gaze told her this was a moment of great change, a doorway to a world unknown. Hand in hand, they descended into the cool depths, where the soft glow of distant fires flickered against stone walls, and whispers of ancient secrets filled the air. Above, Demeter's grief was like a storm sweeping across the land. The vibrant fields faded into muted shades, rivers slowed their journey, and the sun's warmth felt like a distant memory. Her longing for Persephone wove itself into the very soil, calling all living things to rest and wait. The gods watched with heavy hearts, moved by the pain that rippled through earth and sky. Hermes flew swiftly to the underworld, his words gentle yet firm, asking for Persephone's release. When the pomegranate seeds were revealed, binding Persephone to the underworld, the sorrow deepened. Yet in this bittersweet truth lay the promise of balance, a cycle of departure and return, of shadow and light. When Persephone re-emerged each spring, the earth awoke in joyful celebration. Flowers blossomed, birds sang, and the warmth of the sun embraced all living things. When she returned to the underworld, the world hushed, preparing for rest and renewal. And so, the dance of the seasons began, a timeless rhythm of love and loss, of endings and beginnings, woven into the heart of the earth itself. Chapter 15. The Last. Long ago, when the world was young and filled with gods and heroes, there was a man named Odysseus. He was king of the island of Ithaca, a place of rocky shores and olive trees, where the sea whispered stories to the wind and the mountains held secrets of old. Odysseus was no ordinary man. He was clever beyond measure, brave and strong, yet also patient and thoughtful. His mind was a labyrinth of plans and ideas, just like the great maze built by Daedalus. The gods themselves respected him for his wisdom and cunning. For 10 long years, Odysseus fought in the great Trojan War, a conflict of mighty armies and fierce battles that echoed through the ages. He fought alongside heroes like Achilles and Ajax, but his greatest weapon was not his spear or sword, it was his sharp mind. After the fall of Troy, Odysseus and his men set sail for home. But the gods, who often interfered in mortal affairs, had other plans. Poseidon, god of the sea, was angered by Odysseus and sent storms and obstacles to delay his journey. And so began a voyage that would take 10 more years. 10 years filled with danger, wonder, and magic. On the first leg of their journey, Odysseus and his men arrived at the land of the Ciconies. There, they feasted and took riches, but they lingered too long. The Ciconies rallied their warriors and attacked, forcing Odysseus's men to flee with heavy losses. They sailed on, weary but determined. Soon, they reached the island of the Lotus Eaters. The inhabitants offered sweet lotus flowers to Odysseus's men. Those who ate forgot their homes and wished only to stay and eat more lotus. But Odysseus, with firm hands and stern words, dragged his men back to the ships, reminding them of the longing for home. Next came the island of the Cyclops, a land of giants with a single eye in the middle of their foreheads. There, they met Polyphemus, a fearsome giant who trapped them in his cave. Odysseus's quick thinking saved them. Using a sharpened wooden stake, he blinded Polyphemus while the giant slept, and the men escaped by hiding under his sheep. But Polyphemus called upon his father, Poseidon, who grew ever more wrathful toward Odysseus. From there, the journey took Odysseus to the island of Eris, keeper of the winds, who gifted him a bag containing all winds but the favorable west wind. Yet, his curious men opened the bag too soon, releasing the winds and blowing them far off course. Then they reached the land of the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who destroyed all ships but Odysseus's own, forcing a desperate escape. Further on, they arrived at the island of Circe, a sorceress who turned men into swine. With Hermes' help, Odysseus resisted her magic and convinced her to release his men. They stayed for a year, feasting and resting before continuing. But the journey's dangers were far from over. Odysseus ventured to the underworld, seeking prophecy from the shade of Tiresias, who warned him of the trials ahead. He faced the sirens, whose enchanting songs lured sailors to their doom. Odysseus ordered his men to plug their ears with beeswax and had himself bound to the mast to hear the song safely. Next were Scylla and Charybdis, monstrous dangers on either side of a narrow strait. Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla, losing 6 men but saving the rest. Finally, after many hardships, Odysseus's men, driven by hunger, slaughtered the sacred cattle of Ilios despite warnings, bringing doom upon themselves. Only Odysseus survived, washed ashore on the island of the nymph Calypso, who kept him captive for 7 years until the gods commanded his release. At last, Odysseus reached Ithaca, disguised as a beggar. With the help of his son Telemachus and a few loyal servants, he plotted to reclaim his home from the suitors vying for Penelope's hand. In a final test of strength and skill, Odysseus strung his great bow and shot an arrow through 12 axe heads, revealing himself. The suitors were defeated, and peace returned to Ithaca. Odysseus and Penelope were reunited at last, their love enduring after all trials. So, dear listener, as you drift off to sleep, imagine the vast sea stretching to the horizon, the stars shining overhead, and a brave man's heart yearning for home. Remember the lessons of patience, courage, and hope, the very things that carried Odysseus through his long, wondrous journey. As Odysseus stood on the shore of Ithaca, the salty breeze carried whispers of all he had endured, storms that threatened to shatter his ship, creatures both terrifying and magical, the bittersweet memories of friends lost, and the fierce hope that never dimmed. Every step toward his home was a step toward healing, a reunion long awaited. He moved quietly through his kingdom, the familiar sights stirring feelings both joyful and bittersweet. The olive trees swayed gently, their leaves shimmering in the soft sunlight. The stone walls of his palace held stories of laughter, tears, and steadfast love. Penelope, his faithful wife, had waited with unwavering patience, weaving and unraveling a shroud by day, her heart bound to hope. Telemachus, their brave son, had grown into a young man ready to defend their home. Together, they restored peace and harmony, rebuilding what time and turmoil had threatened to tear apart. Odysseus learned that home was more than a place. It was the embrace of those who loved him, the quiet moments of understanding, and the courage to face each new dawn. So, as your eyes grow heavy and the night wraps you gently, remember Odysseus's journey, a tale of trials and triumphs, of wisdom and love. Let it remind you that no matter how long or winding the road, the heart's true home waits patiently, welcoming you always. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you on adventures as grand and gentle as those of Odysseus himself.